There's a humanizing aspect to all of this, that when we actually share something honest about each other, right, it changes our capacity for understanding. It makes us a more complete human being, and it connects us because everyone goes through shit. No one is immune.
You're listening to Staring at the World with BoDeans, Kurt Newman, a T. Torrance Productions original podcast.
Hey everybody, it's Kurt Newman, Staring at the World podcast. Today, my guest, Andrew Zimmern, who you know him from his cooking shows on several networks. But we're going to talk about a lot of stuff, from his childhood to his struggles with addiction. And this is part one of a two-part series. So I hope you listen to them both because it's really interesting stuff. Hello and welcome, everybody. I'm Kurt Newman, and today we are staring at the world with one of the most influential celebrity chefs in the world. Everybody knows you from all your many shows on the Travel Channel, Bazaar Foods with Andrew Zimmern, Bazaar Foods America, Bazaar Foods Delicious Destinations, Dining with Death, many shows, as well as the Food Network, the Big Food Truck. Chef, restaurateur, TV, radio personality, director, producer, entrepreneur, food critic, journalist, teacher, and author. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Mr. Andrew Zimmern. How you doing?
I'm good. I had forgotten. You made me laugh already. The Death Food show was absolutely hysterical, and it reminded me of how much the television business has changed over the last 20 years, the media business in general, just like the music business, and so many other different pillars in our culture. The change over the last 20 years in TV has been astronomical. More change in the last couple of years than the previous 120 since they first figured out how to take a moving image. Right. The show was a hit at Bazaar Foods, the very first thing that I did for Travel Channel. Well, not very first thing. We made a couple pilots and some specials for them, but the show was a big hit right away. And Bourdain's hit was. He had started his show about 9 months before I did, and they put us back to back on the same night, so it became sort of like just was an explosive evening for the network and for the conglomeration of shows that were under, at the time, the Scripps family of lifestyle networks.
Yeah.
So they were like, how do we get more shows in? Well, it took us so long to make an episode of Bazaar Foods in those days, and the budgets were so low. They bought the network bought a show in Europe called Dining with Death.
Yeah.
And they bought it for nothing, a couple $100,000, like 12 episodes of this thing. And I basically voiced it over and did some green screen stuff, and they were able. And I had, in my contract, I had absolutely no say so. I mean, if they told me we're going to shoot pictures of you standing in a vat of grape juice up to your navel, I would have to do it. So they said, you have to go in and do this. I said, first of all, this is so overly fantastical, and some of the facts are wrong. And they said, we don't care. We need more stuff with your face on it.
Content.
And I remember going back to my attorneys and saying, at what point do I get to make a choice about what I do? And they said, well, if you get through your first contract and the first 3 contract terms, which are years of pickups on the show, then we can renegotiate. And at that point, the only reason that we're renegotiating is because it's a hit, and you'll be able to say no to stuff like this if you don't want to do it. Right. And I'm like, okay, good. And I remember deciding at that point, I'm going to work my ass off to make sure that this thing happens and we get consecutive terms sold, because I can't be doing shows like Dining with Death. I want to do shows like what I did on MSNBC with What's Eating America, things that is both entertaining, which I believe in. I believe people want to be entertained, but I think you can do it in a way that is an adventure for the audience. And I also think I like to do shows, even my family dinner show on Magnolia, that is streaming now and goes linear January 4th on the new Magnolia Network. You learn something from it. You leave the show shaking your head and saying, wow, I didn't know that, and I'm inspired by that, or I care about that more, while at the same time having an adventure and being entertained.
Yeah, which is why I was happy to talk to you today, because I've, done some research for this interview, but I was also listening to your audiobook, and a lot of what you said fits right in with what kind of this podcast was supposed to be about. I talk about the creative element, how people use creativity, or they listen to intuition in their lives to make decisions, sometimes almost seemingly radical decisions to do something that just feels right to them, right? And so when I was listening to your book and listening to some of the stories of what you were talking about, I think you fit exactly, and you're a shining inspirational story for what I'm trying to talk about in this podcast as well, because you had a vision for creativity and entertaining people with foods, and you felt that inside and you wanted to bring it to people in your way, and you were able to do that. And so I think
there was a weird selfish choice though that I made, or the first 30 years of my life, I made decisions based on self that later put me in a position to be hurt. I made a couple of decisions based on self that, over the last 30 years of my life, it's neatly bisected because I'm 60, that have turned out okay, but I've made those decisions with other people, right? And the big one based on self, with this conversation is, getting sober, and, for me was a hinge event in my life. It changed everything, and my life went in a completely different direction. And I realized that making food in a small little hot box with 15 other people was not enough of a platform. That restaurant wasn't enough of a platform. The books wouldn't be enough of a platform. I wanted to have a bigger audience for what I felt was a really, really important idea. And this is 18, 19, well, no longer. This is 20 years ago. Which was, we were living in a world that was becoming increasingly divisive and polarized. And, one of the only superpowers that, I had to pick one, it's that I can sort of see downstream based on what's happening in pop culture, where things are shifting. And I've always been able to see that. And it's for whatever reason, if I can get quiet and focus and prioritize, I can start to work on the right kind of thing. And I knew that if we could show people in Australia how people in Greenland ate, and if we could show people in Madagascar how people in New Jersey ate, and vice versa, we might be able to be more accepting of, who people chose to love, what language they spoke, the color of their skin, all these things that seem to be dividing us and polarizing us more and more. And I wound up being a little bit more right than wrong. The amazing thing to me was, from a creative standpoint, and it was a very, very firm decision, talking with the chairman of the network privately. I pitched him a show that was very, very serious about exploring culture through food. Right. And he said, look, if you make that, I can't air it, but I'll help you air it on public television, and you'll win some awards and the applause of your colleagues, and they'll make 8 episodes, but not enough people will watch it. He said, but if you flip the equation around, because what I was selling him was 75% intelligence and 25% entertainment. He said, if you switch it around and give me 75% entertainment and 25% intelligence, we can broadcast this in 170 countries, on the whole Discovery,
Sure.
platform. He said, and some people, and he was right. Pat Young, who was running the network at the time, was so smart. He said, look, some people are just going to come home from work and put up their feet and they want to see a fat white guy going around the world eating bugs. And they may just see it for that. They may come to understand there's more going on here. There are some people who are going to watch the first episode and they're going to actually be hearing what you're saying. And they're going to pick up on the fact that what you're really doing is preaching about patience, tolerance, and understanding.
Right.
He said, but the numbers, he says, you're going to be in front of so many more people. He says, I hope you make the choice to do it with me and not with someone else. And I went home that night and I slept, and I went and met him for breakfast the next morning in Bethesda, Maryland, where Travel Channel was located at the time. And I said, I'm in. And it was a smart move, because the more people stop me today on the street and say, you taught me how to be respectful of other cultures, and other people through the show. More people stop me and say that than say, wow, I can't believe you hunted wild bats, in Samoa and ate them. And, people still stop me for that, but I get more of the former than the latter. And I'm just so grateful that I made that right decision back then.
Yeah, it's very much, I do a similar thing. I literally tell the audience this, in the middle of the show, that same thing. I use music to get to them, but what I'm singing about is paradise and good things and dreams and all these only love, messages, but they're coming through rock and roll. And I say the same thing. There's so much divisiveness. Here, we all come together and we sing a song together, and you notice there's no divisiveness at all. So you use this entertainment kind of platform to actually preach a good message to people and put out some positive vibes to people that hopefully, I think they do pick up on it. I really do.
I'm convinced of it, and then you have the amplification of those other folks. They may say to their friends, hey, you got to listen to this album. Or I just dated myself. You gotta listen to this, or you gotta watch this. And I think that's very powerful these days. People talk about the negative aspects of social media and other ways in which gazillions of people can be reached. But I do think we are, I'll just give you an example, not in your business, or well, actually a little bit in mine, because I own a television production company. We do make some documentaries, but it used to be so hard 20 years ago. Good luck watching a documentary. You had to be in a city that had a movie theater that aired them, or eventually you would watch them on some public television station, if you were lucky to have one in your state that was funded, that could participate in the purchase of those shows. Right. And now on all the streamers, Hulu, Netflix, Amazon, you name it, when you open up their homepage, there are documentaries. And I know everyone's talking about Red Notice being such a big hit on Netflix, but Tiger King, which was a documentary, a type of documentary, at the time was the most, you go down there and you look at all these things. I was looking at the other day, I'm like, I'm so happy that there is access to these intelligent takes that are teaching people about what's really going on in the world. And I think that's a fascinating thing. And the streamers are pumping out, in their social, people are picking up on their social, and it's a way in which we're communicating that actually gives me some hope.
Yeah, and in my case too, people walk out of the room that night, hopefully they had fun, and they noticed when they walked out with that fun that they didn't actually have any divisiveness with people. It was mostly about uniting and the energy of uniting, and through this creative, positive energy that we all created. Andrew, I want to talk to you a little bit about going way, way back to your humble beginnings and some of your childhood, because I think for the listeners who listen to this, they don't always know, your backstory. And so do you think you could talk a little bit about like coming up where you were raised, what your parents were like, and how you were raised a little bit, and so we can understand where it all
Sure.
started?
Yeah, I'm born and raised in New York City, born in 1961.
We are the
My
same
parents,
age. We are the
congratulations.
same.
My parents were both rebelling against their parents. They were raised under very strict circumstances, and I think as a parent myself, I'm now stricter with my child than my father and mother were with me. I think it just keeps like a Mobius strip, just going generation by generation.
Yeah.
But both my parents, I didn't come with an instruction book. No one talked about trauma. Trauma not transformed is transmitted. So my dad's very strict upbringing, coming from a family that didn't have much, fighting for 3 years in the Pacific in World War II, seeing some awful and horrible things, and then building a business and becoming, and as a closeted gay man in the 40s, 50s, 60s, then up to 61 when I was born. He married my mother. He was very much in love with her, but he wanted to have a son. And they divorced soon after. And my father had met the love of his life, who he was with for the next 50 years until they died, my stepfather, Andre Laporte. So I had a set of gay parents. And then I had my mother, who was a debutante in New York, came from a well-to-do family, and she was an artist and designer. And so to have these two parents who just loved to travel and eat and explore and navigate and ask questions, they had incredible cultural curiosity, and they were very, very liberal. I went to an extremely liberal private school in New York City. We were surrounded by makers, is what they would call those people now. I was raised in an environment where whatever I wanted to do, my parents supported, something I also do with my son. Not necessarily financial, but if I had an interest in painting, they went and we painted. If I had, and my interest was in food and travel, and my parents did that already to a certain degree, but that became my passion, and it became the thing that I believe was of paramount importance. And by the time I was 13, 14, I had enough experience traveling that I knew that the stories and the things that I experienced when I was overseas, or even on the other side of town, because I was a New Yorker.
Yeah.
Upper East Side of Manhattan was different
Right.
than going with my dad to Arthur Avenue in Queens, where
Right.
everyone spoke Italian on the street. And that to me was traveling.
Sure.
Travel and food transformed me. I went to Arthur Avenue with my dad. I'll keep it super local. I saw this Italian culture, before I ever went to Italy for the first time when I was 10 or 11 with him. But I had been to Arthur Avenue several times a year with my dad to eat at restaurants out there. My mind was blown by what I saw out on Arthur Avenue. On the east side of Manhattan in 1967, we didn't have what they had in Arthur Avenue. You would see people coming out of trucks with sticks, and hanging from them would be 40 or 50 pheasants or squab,
right,
or baby pigs.
Wow.
Going into butcher stores and stuff like that. I saw things that boggled my mind.
Yeah.
There was no trade agreement with Italy at the time. So olive oil was coming in, falling off of trucks, good olive oil. And that's what drove my father actually out to discover Arthur Avenue. He had been to the Bronx High School of Science. He knew there was an Italian neighborhood out there, but he wanted Italian ingredients to cook with. And there weren't a lot of them in New York until the early 70s, when we had a trade agreement with Italy sufficient to remove import taxes so that a reasonable price could be found by the consumer for olive oil and vinegar and imported pasta and stuff. Really, you had to seek it out in the 60s. Huh. And so I've realized the value of that. So when I turned 14 and my dad said, "You don't get allowance anymore, go get a job," I said, "Great, I want to work in kitchens." And that's what I did. And I've been collecting a paycheck in the food business ever since. And that was 46 years ago. Along the way, because my dad was a stuffer of emotions, and because my mother was, really went through several traumatic periods in her life, and She actually had an operation in 1974 that she was in an oxygen tent in a coma for a couple of months, and then in hospitals recovering. So she had some physical trauma issues as well. I knew what drugs and alcohol did to my brain. They made me peaceful. They removed the stink of the negative feelings that I was feeling. I was an addict and an alcoholic before I ever picked up a drink or a drug, but because I did have experience with those things and saw what they did with my older cousins and friends, and it was I lived through the 60s and into the 70s, and I was in New York. Everything was easy to find, and so my addiction and my alcoholism started very early that summer that I turned 14 as well. And because I'm working in a restaurant, and people are like, hey, they're smoking a joint, they're having a shift drink after work, and I was 14, but I was part of the crew,
right?
And it started there and just got uglier and uglier. Along the way, I graduated high school, I graduated college, I worked summers and semesters when I was kicked out of college in restaurants all over Europe and Asia. And I had talent at it. I mean, I was good. I had the natural ability, and I also had the gift of gab, so I could con my way into whatever work situation I needed. Until the time that my alcoholism and drug addiction made me unemployable, unfriendable, unrelated. And by the way, at that point, I didn't care. I was fully a user of people and a taker of things. I had, no desire. I went from that place where you would say to me, I'm really worried about you. X, Y, and Z has happened. And I think drugs and alcohol are the issue. And I'd spin a tale and deny it and come up with excuses. And then I got to the point where people would say to me, something, you lied to me, you cheated, you stole, you did this or that. And I know the problem is drugs and alcohol. And I just looked at them and I said, go fuck yourself.
Yeah, right.
Because I didn't care. I cared more about my chemicals. And once that happened, it was a quick downward slope to homelessness.
Yeah.
I was living in an abandoned building on Sullivan Street in Lower Manhattan, stealing a bottle of Comet Cleanser every, 2 or 3 days to sprinkle around the pile of dirty clothes I passed out on every night so the rats and roaches wouldn't crawl over my body. And that led very quickly to the, look where my life has gotten me. I was a child of privilege. I had every advantage, and I crapped all over it. And there's winners and losers in life. I'm a loser. What do I care about living? And I checked into I stole some jewelry from one of my godparents, hocked it in New Jersey, came back into Manhattan, went to a flophouse hotel that doesn't exist anymore called the San Pedro. It's just an awful place. And I put some money down for 3 or 4 days, went across the street to a liquor store, got a case of cheap vodka. And I remember the most vivid memory I have at that day is buying it and then lifting up the case, like trying to lift with my knees and back, because you didn't want to hurt yourself, right? Even though my plan is to drink myself to death, but I don't want to hurt my back.
Right. That's incredible.
I reach and I grab this case, and it was so light. And I was like a deer in the headlights. I looked at the sales guy, and he looked at me and he went, "It's a new thing, plastic bottles." And I was just like, oh my gosh. So I was like, I just remember that feeling of like, there was no elevator at the San Pedro. Right. So I had to walk up 2 flights of stairs. I was like, well, this is going to be easy. And I put the case on my shoulder and up I went. And I tried to drink myself to death. It didn't work. I had what I believe was a divinely inspired moment where I plugged the phone back into the wall. I'd ripped the cord out 3 days beforehand when I got there. And I called a friend, and I did something I had never done before, literally in my life. And that was ask for help. And I was honest for like 2 minutes with him. When he arrived to help me, I started to be dishonest again. I mean, the window was just open a crack. But luckily, the jig was up. He didn't believe anything that I was spinning. He knew that when I had called him, what I said on the phone was the truth, which was, I'm ready to do anything. Help me, please. And he, as much as I tried to take it back, he organized an intervention. And 3 days later, I was in Center City, Minnesota, in the Hazelden Continuum of Care.
Right.
And that was January 28th, 1992, which is my sobriety date. And things have gotten progressively better and more interesting ever since. And I'm just, I predicate my life now based on service work. It's how I stay right-sized. It's how I stay sober. And even my shows are born out of that desire. And I found when I'm on that path, when I'm trudging that road, things work out. Not always to my benefit, but at least I'm okay with it. I'm not filled with anger and resentment about it. And right-sized living is the greatest gift that I've ever had. And I wish I could give it to other people. It's why I talk about it a lot. Everyone has to come to it from their own journey. But boy, does it make life a lot easier. I'm not sure there's anything that could happen in my life where I would tell you I wouldn't be okay afterwards. And I'm talking about big stuff. Yeah. I mean, if all of my businesses disappeared overnight or something horrible happened to a family member or whatever, it would devastate me. It would kneecap me. I would be a mess for a long time, but I know I would be okay because I survived that other stuff and I was okay. And I really do have a certainty that I will be okay as long as I'm doing the stuff that I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah. I grew up, both my parents are pretty heavy drinkers. My dad drank himself to death eventually. And so I watched it as a kid. And I like what you said earlier about transform, or you transmit it kind of, because watching him as a kid, I just didn't want that. It didn't appeal to me. Even though I was in this life of rock music and touring and all that lifestyle, I never had this stomach to do that because I had this example in front of me of kind of what I didn't want and what didn't appeal to me. And I also felt like music, being able to play it was such a gift that I took it so seriously, But was there a moment in all of that that you think back into about your drinking and drugs where you think like, this is where it clicked with me, that I needed to change? Like, was there just one moment? I mean, the one you just cited, was that like it, or was there something else in your life that said, I just don't want this?
I had a feeling every single day of my life as I kept going lower and lower and lower through every one of Dante's circles of hell. I always thought to myself, I can't do this anymore. I need to change. The voice, the quiet moment at 5 a.m. when your eyes open and then you sort of go back to sleep unless there's something on your mind. Well, I had all these horrible secrets on my mind. I had all these horrific thoughts on my mind. My mind was filled with so many nightmares and scary stories that the first thing I did when I had that thought of, oh my God, I need to stop this. I'm overwhelmed. This thing is going to kill me. Yeah. Instead of acting on that feeling, the other voice that popped up into my head said, just take a sip of that bottle next to you, or pop that pill, or smoke that joint, or sniff that dope, or snort that line, whatever it was. And I did that instead. That idea won out. That's how powerful the disease truly is. Now, I will tell you, there were moments in my life that I look back on that I realized those were moments where I crossed lines that eventually led me to want to kill myself. Because there was so much shame associated with it. But I also believe eventually they became the most powerful parts of my story because I survived it. I didn't I didn't die, and I got sober, and now I understand it. So, when I stole from my mother, who was incapacitated.
Right.
I mean, what could be more horrible than, stealing drugs from your mother that she needs to survive while she's in a hospital?
Yeah.
I remember, as a kid, child of privilege, I knew how nightclubs worked. And there were a couple really famous ones in New York that I attended when life was fun. And then when my life turned darker, especially the year that I was homeless, there were other clubs, but I knew how they operated. And I knew at 2, 3 in the morning, some Wall Street guy would wander out of it unaccompanied, kind of staggering down the street. And if I went to the right club that had the right alley or the right sort of dark spot down the street, and he didn't hail a cab right away and wasn't followed out by friends, that person I could push down on the ground and steal their money. Right?
Right.
Now, that's a horrible thing. I can't even believe. I mean, it's emotional for me to talk about, because
Sure.
I can't believe that was my idea. That behavior is so aberrant. It's so not who I want to be. It was when I remember days later thinking to myself, who the fuck have I become?
Yeah.
This is horrific. And yet at the same time, there I was 2 weeks later doing it again because my other hustles didn't work. Right.
It's interesting though, also because when
they add up, to your point, they add up. Right. And I think they finally do become transformative for you. For me, it was, I'm going to off myself, but it didn't happen. I couldn't quite drink myself to death. And I got that one moment of clarity where instead of reaching for the drink or drug, I called a friend.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying is true. You're kind of living proof of how you can make that journey from there to where you are. Because when I first see you on TV, and what I had known was the TV commercials for the show, it's all uplifting, inspirational kind of guy. And so when you tell me these stories about who you were, it's really hard to get my mind around, other than I've seen those people plenty in my life who make those choices. And so I know, but it's hard for me to put it together talking to you right now.
This is why conversation is so important.
Right.
Because I mean, I'm not going to lie. I've been a fan of yours for a long time. Right. And so I see one person, and now I also see a child watching his father drinking too much.
Yeah.
And my child is going to be 17 on his next birthday. He's never seen me take a drink or a drug, but I have plenty of friends, plenty of memories. I watched my father drink too much. There's a humanizing aspect to all of this, that when we actually share something honest about each other, right, it changes our capacity for understanding. It makes us a more complete human being, and it connects us because everyone goes through shit. No one is immune. One of my spiritual gurus, actually my sponsor in a 12-step group, is very fond of saying that life is fired at point blank range. I may walk out this door and win a lottery ticket. I may get hit by a car. We really don't know what's going to happen 5 seconds from now. Right. It comes at us fast and furious. And it is in sharing things with other people that we increase our awareness about how to navigate life. I'm really not interested in talking about news, weather, and sports with people when I meet them. Right. Everyone is always put off when they say, I love news, weather, and sports. Actually, I love news and sports. I'm not a big weather guy. But when someone says, hey, how you doing today? I give them a real answer. And on some days that makes people really uncomfortable.
No, I do that too. And that's strange you say that, because my kids and wife look at me often like, what are you doing? But I get up to the cash register saying, like, how are you doing today? And they expect you to say, fine. I'm just like, and I just look at them like, I'm not good at all. And they don't even know how to answer that. But I don't know in my core how to give a lie or a fake answer of, oh, I'm great, because that's just not who I am either. So it's funny to hear you say that.
Well, for listeners, I don't wear my personal issues on my arm like a badge.
Everybody, that was Andrew Zimmern. Just really incredible stuff. Not just about, his career developing these cooking shows, but into getting through addiction and his life growing up, and a lot of philosophy thrown in there as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I certainly did. Remember to subscribe, send the show to your friends, rate and review, whatever you got to do. Man, thank you for being with us. This is Kurt Newman signing off.
Thanks for listening to Staring at the World with BoDeans, Kurt Newman, a podcast about creative innovation. Please be sure to download, subscribe, rate, and review, and keep listening wherever you get your podcasts.